today we've got Reverend Dr. Rick Lowery, Hebrew Bible scholar, attorney Caitlin Swain, co-founder of Forward Justice and one of the lead counsel in the North Carolina NAACP versus McCory case and many other cases fighting for voting rights using both federal and state law. To Marc, Elias, who's the founder of Democracy, Docket. When you find a case about voting rights, you're gonna find Marc in the mix. He's taught me more about the law as a jackleg lawyer. I've tried to teach him some about preaching. And somewhere in the midst of this. And then a sister who I've grown to love and adore in the movement, you know, we call it revolutionary love, for her power, her grace, her commitment to humanity across the board. And she never loses that compass. Miss LaTosha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matters Fund. Would you welcome them all here today? Now, Rick, what we've been trying to do, we put Rosanelle Eaton in the room as an impacted person. You all are all policy persons, but Rick is our theologian. He's our pastor for today because what we've decided is that every panel we needed to ground it, you know, in theology, you know, grounded in the scriptural text. Because we as ministers and others, we can't just talk like everybody else talks. We have to, you know, if the book doesn't talk, we have to be silent. And so help us understand a way that the scriptures and the Christian tradition speak to us about voting rights that's not merely, okay, it's something that you get from a constitution that was written in the United States. You have a particular interpretation out of Genesis. Listen up, brothers and sisters, and get your phones out wherever your Bible is and turn to the text so you can actually do it in real time when he gives it to us. Rick?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I just feel so humble being with superstars like this, so I'm really happy to be here. The Bible starts, and this is Christian, Jewish, Muslim, all of Western tradition, kind of starts with Genesis chapter 1. And Genesis begins with the creation story. It actually goes from 1 verse 1 all the way into the first half of chapter 2 verse 4. The story really does not end at the end of chapter 1. So it's 1:1 through 2:4a. This is what we usually say. 2:4a. And there are a number of reasons. I won't go into it. But it starts with a story of creation. And first I want to make a general comment about creation stories in the ancient Middle East. Creation stories are not about the past. They're not about the distant past. They are about the present. They are about the world as it is and why it is this way, and who we are and what our place is in it, and how we're supposed to act. So that's the point of creation stories in the ancient Middle East. Now, the Genesis story borrows, I would say, ostentatiously from the Babylonian creation story. And I say ostentatiously because I think that it is deliberate. I think that what they're trying to do is to draw a contrast. So first I want to say just a few words about the Babylonian creation story, and then I want to get into the key verses which come later in Genesis 1 that I want to talk about today. The Babylonian story it portrays creation as a cosmic war, a cosmic battle between the mother of all the gods, a goddess named Tiamat, and Marduk, who is the god of thunderstorms, and it just so happens the patron deity of Babylon, the capital, the imperial capital of the Babylonian Empire. So Marduk has to get the raging, out-of-control woman, the female deity, into some kind of order. And he goes to battle against Tiamat and ultimately kills her and splits her body in two and makes the dome of the sky and the disk of the earth. And then out of the disk of the earth, out of that soil, he mixes it with the blood of her general and her lover, Kingu, and creates human beings. And human beings are created for one purpose, and that is to farm and make things and make sacrifice, farm and herd, and then make sacrifices to the gods. So the gods can feed off of the smoke of the sacrifices that rise up. So human beings in the Babylonian creation story are created to be slaves, to live lives of permanent servitude for the cosmic 1% of the universe, the elites at the top, okay? So they feed off of the labor of human beings. That is their purpose. So Marduk is enthroned as the king of all the gods. So the god of the city of Babylon is the king of all the deities. Now, Genesis 1 is well familiar with this story, as in, everybody in the Babylonian imperial world was. Genesis 1 tells a story that borrows very obviously and liberally from that Babylonian story. And I could go into all the reasons, but I won't. I won't bore you with that. But I will focus your attention on verses 26 and 27 in particular in Genesis chapter 1. So God has created not by divine combat, but by a word spoken. The world comes into being, it's ordered progressively. There is no violence at all in this story. There's just the Word of God, okay? And by God's Word, the Word comes into being. Now the story starts out, it says, when God began creating the sky and the earth was, the world was formless void. Now this word create is a word bara in Hebrew, and its root meaning is to be fat. Okay? To create is to create fatness, which in the ancient world, unlike this sick culture in which we live, to be fat was a good thing, because it implies abundance, lavishness, health, prosperity, okay? So the very act of creation in Genesis 1 is an act of creating lavish abundance. See? Fatness. See? This is why I say we got to get back to the Bible, right? I like this. So already in Genesis 1, we have a world that is created to be abundant, lavishly abundant. There's not scarcity. There is abundance. There is more than enough. Not just to survive, but to thrive. And God creates throughout this story with lavish generosity. Okay? All right, so God is creating a fat, lavish, abundant world. Now, and this is underlined in the story by this little refrain. After every day of creation, God says, yes, it usually is translated, it was good. This word is tov in Hebrew. It's like mazel tov, okay? Tov. And the word, I mean, it means good, but I usually it's more than that. It's like the goodness of the harvest time. You know, after the crops come in and you've got an abundance of food, and I usually translate this word not as good, but as delightful. Okay? So all through this story, God is creating and saying, oh man, that's delightful, you know, until finally we get to the creation of human beings. And here's what it says in Genesis 1:26. I'm reading it from the Hebrew and translating. This is the new Rick Lowery version, is what this particular translation is called. I was giving Marc bar mitzvah PTSD back here, you know, saying, hey, look at this. But then he said, well, you got the vowels in there, so you're cheating, you know. He had it without the vowel. But anyhow, and God said, let's make Adam, a human, in our image. Or here, I want to just say one little word about that preposition that translated in. In Hebrew, this translation is ba. And like in any language, going from, you know, one language to another, prepositions are particularly hard to translate. So it can mean a variety of things depending on the context. I think that the better way to translate this ba here is not as in, but as. So God said, let's create a human being as our own image, according to our likeness. And then there's a syntactical construction in Hebrew. We also have it in English, where I say, I want to go to the store and buy a loaf of bread. What that means is purpose. You know, let's go to the store so that we can. That's the syntax we've got here. Okay, so it's let's create a human being as our own image, according to our own likeness, so that. Okay, so for the purpose of ruling or governing. That's the way I would translate that. Governing within creation. And then it goes on, and then we have this ba again that gets translated as over, but I would translate it as with. So they can govern with. And you stop me, Bishop, if I'm going too long. Okay.
I stood up because it got good.
All right, okay. So they can govern, and then with all the created world, and so God created. Now I'm in verse 27. So God created bara, the human, but as God's own image. God created them, and here the term is B'Tselem Elohim. The word here for image is the word Tselem. If any of you who've been spending time in Israel, I don't know if you've been, Marc, but the human rights organization in Israel is called B'Tselem. It's from this.
From that text.
In the image, as the image. Okay? Oops, I messed up my text here. Let's see. But Tselem Elohim, as the image. Now, let me just say one quick word about image, Tselem. This is the Hebrew version of a word, an Akkadian word, which was the Babylonian and Assyrian Empire. They used Akkadian language. The word is Tsalmu. Mm-hmm. A Tsalmu was a carved out image, and it's a picture, usually a picture of a deity, or often it's a picture telling a story of a deity handing over authority to a king of some sort. Okay? So it is and they would carve these things on these stela, these stones, and basically they would plant them. And it was like a flag. It was like planting a flag. And so if you had this story where a deity is giving authority to, say for example, the king of Babylon, that means in this place, my authority, Marduk, through my image on earth, which is the king sitting on the throne in Babylon, the emperor sitting on the throne in Babylon, this is my territory. My law appears here. Okay? Now, so that's what people are used to with image, with Tselem. The image of God is the emperor. Mm-hmm. Okay? And that claims that territory and that people for the emperor. Mm-hmm. All right? Look at what's happening here in this story. Genesis says every human being, and then adds, interestingly enough, male and female, equally in community with one another, are created as God's own image in the earth.
Come on.
Okay? So we are the stela.
The flag.
We are the sign of God's authority in the earth. Every single one of us. And we are created to govern.
Come on.
Now, they probably were not, what we would say in the modern world, Democrats or democracy. Who knows what their
and Rick,
politics.
I think what I wanted to I want us to hear particularly the importance of this kind of biblical exegesis when you're in the public square. This is how you get away from using the same language that the folk use out there, the left, right, that kind of stuff. That I'm coming here to say something different. And I'm coming here to say, you all claim one nation under God. You say all these things, but do you really know what that means to say inalienable rights from the Creator? Well, for us, inalienable rights is I'm the image created to govern, and then hook that to voting so we can, I want to hear the panelists. How would you hook it?
Yeah, okay. I think that this is the perfect biblical text for democracy, for ruling, by the people. The people are the ones who rule in the earth. Now, I just want to say one final thing, and then I'll quit. And that is, the story does not end here. The story continues through 2:4a with God resting. Okay? All right. So this is related to God's abundance in the world. That we have not just enough to survive, but to thrive. There is more than enough for everybody. In fact, God says, there is 7 days of wealth for 6 days of work. You get more out of life than you put into it, okay? There is plenty to go around. There is surplus. You don't have to have a scarcity mentality. You don't have to say, I got to get all mine, Jack, and you just fend for yourself. No, it is lavish abundance, okay? So the end of the story is Sabbath abundance, which then in Exodus, is tied to giving a day of rest for everybody in your household, including your workers. In Deuteronomy 5, it's tied to the Exodus story from Egypt, where the Israelites were trapped in debt servitude, wage theft from the Egyptians. They were liberated from that. And that is tied in Deuteronomy 5 to Sabbath keeping. That's why you keep Sabbath. It's to celebrate God's lavish abundance in the world. You got enough to share. And
right.
It is your responsibility to share. And every day, every week of the year, you got to take a day to remind yourself of that. So that's all I got.
And so, Rick, in that interpretation, then that means that we are not called to vote or to rule like Murdoch with violence.
That's right. Not like Marduk, not like the Babylonian emperor.
We're called to vote and to govern lavishly like God to ensure that all people have an abundance and that they can too rest. That they don't have to work themselves to the bone. This is my basis for voting for a candidate that supports living wages and so forth and so on and so on. And then in that sense, if my authority to rule comes from God, and part of my way of exercising that authority in the earth is voting, then when you deny my right to vote, you're trying to deny my image.
That's right.
So then voting then is not merely something I get from a constitution. That to suggest that you can suppress my right to vote is to suggest you can suppress my imago Dei, my being made in the image of God. Because I've been called to dominion, which is not rulership and domination and destruction, but it is caring for the abundance and making sure that the abundance doesn't get locked up in the hands of a few. So I'm not here today. I'm not at this state house today to just argue that I got a right to vote because of the Constitution. I am going to argue that. But I got to be here as a moral agent because I cannot let you suggest that I'm less than human. I'm less than what God created me to be. And every time you suppress the vote, that's what you're saying. So Caitlin and Marc, that's biblical. That's right. Like he said, it's not just good, it's biblical. And you know I love it that it's fat. God knows. I'm hallelujah about that.
Yeah, me hype.
Some of y'all ought to look at your neighbor and say, me too. Because don't none of us fit them little categories. They talk about what size you should be. 5'2", 110 pounds. Come on. Caitlin and Marc, you've dedicated yourselves to fighting voter suppression, not just as a job, but as a way of life. First question real quick, why does it matter to you? And then Caitlin, help us understand the particular fights you're working on and why they matter to the nation. The particular fights, Marc, the cases you're dealing with across the country and what's at stake. So the particular fights you're fighting and why it matters, and for Marc, what's at stake. And I was reminded yesterday how people need to pay attention to the whole nation. In this room, most of you all are not from Mississippi, but we better have a moral, public theological way that we don't forget the South. Because, for instance, the case that led to the overturning of Roe versus Wade came out of Mississippi.
That's right.
So you can't sit up here in Connecticut or New York or New Jersey or California somewhere and say, I don't care what happened, they just backwards down there. No, because the case that sought to, that got voting rights thrown out came out of Alabama.
That's right.
Right? So we can't have this, we can't try to find like a way to engage politics that limits a whole region of that's not the kind of public role we have. So Caitlin, Marc, take it.
Go ahead, Caitlin.
All right, I'm going to start us. So you all heard Rosanelle Eaton, did you not?
That's right.
She said, fed up, fired up. She said that 10 years ago when the Voting Rights Act was gutted.
That's right.
So we sit together here 10 years without a full Voting Rights Act in this country. We sit together, we're not mourning that. Maybe we are mourning it. But we sit at a moment where we are being asked, how do we hold that, this time that we're in? How can we hold it differently if this is the birthing pangs of something new, not only the last gasp of something that has been? That is what Rosanelle Eaton was saying to us. She said, I see what is coming. I see that this is coming. And what she was seeing was an effort to roll us backwards. She said, you are rolling back what I gave my life for. And when she said that to us, she also said, but don't mistake the time we're in. They are seeking to do that because we are in the birthing pangs of something new.
That's right.
And that is what this movement
That's right.
has been teaching us. That is when Reverend Barber came to us and said, we need lawyers who do not just pass the bar, but who raise the bar.
Come on.
We said, tell us how to sign up. Tell us how to be a part of this with Marc Elias. Tell us how to be a part of this with Penda Hare, with Anita Earls, with so many incredible leaders across this country who are stepping in. But we're stepping in not as the leaders. We're stepping in to serve a movement cry that says we will not turn backwards in this time. So one of the things I want to just put in this room is that we've been together for the last few days talking about really a rising white nationalist front that is singing the same song, same dangerous song, just a different verse. And what I have heard from leaders like those sitting beside me is that is true, but we are convinced that we, the people, are writing the new anthem right now. And that is the anthem of the America that has yet to be the other America. And there is a legal, political, economic, and cultural effort right now to turn down the mic on that song because of its power. So when you ask, why do we do this? Why do we come in? It's because we're listening to that anthem, and we're trying to turn the mic back up on it. So when Dr. Barber said, what is the crux of this? We say, yes, change the South, change the nation. They understand to control the South is to control the nation. So I wanted to spend a moment there.
And that's helpful to help us understand what you mean by that and
Yes.
what are the particular kinds of attacks
Yes.
you are seeing in the South and why it matters.
Yes, indeed. So just what do I mean by change the South, change the nation, control the South, control the nation? In 2024, the year we are in, 176 electoral votes are controlled in the South, the southern states. You need 270 to win the presidency. You all do that math, right? When the Voting Rights Act was gutted 10 years ago, we sit here just after that anniversary. 11 out of 13 southern states immediately passed regressive laws making it harder for people of color, poor people in this country to vote. Since Shelby was decided, at least 29 states, these numbers grow, so I'm going to tell you the current list.
Keep this mic on, please.
Yes.
Get your pens out, because we forget these numbers. She said 176 electoral votes. That means if you control the South, you only need 96 electoral college votes from the other 37 states.
That is the Southern strategy, y'all. That is what we are interrupting every time we do what Reverend Lowery told us to do, which is to say, no, we are worthy. What Pam Garrison said yesterday, we are worthy. This vote is ours. 11 out of 13 southern states immediately passed regressive laws making it harder for people of color and poor people to vote. And since that case was decided, at least 29 states have passed 94 restrictive voting laws disproportionately enacted in southern states. So Marc is going to tell you nationwide about the fight back. I'm going to tell you about what's happening in the South, and I'm going to talk about in North Carolina briefly.
Good.
So you heard from Dan Blue yesterday and Reverend Barber about what happened when there was a mass takeover of the state legislature in North Carolina to create an unconstitutional supermajority. Now, we talked about it in North Carolina, but it happened all across the South. Unconstitutional supermajorities that were created through racial gerrymanders and partisan gerrymanders. And you all know this because you're living it. You understand what that experience is like with your constituencies.
Let me check the room. Does everybody here know what gerrymandering is? Anybody need explanation? Do you know where gerrymandering started? In Boston.
That's right.
Didn't start in the South.
That's right.
It was started to deal with the Irish. See how we got to know this history? Because in the room, most folks say in the South. It was in Boston, and it was to isolate Irish people. Go ahead. I'm just
yes,
interjecting
indeed.
a little teaching.
I'm with it. So where are we now? After the Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance provisions were taken out, right? So this means southern states in particular, but formerly covered states across the nation, had the ability to push the burden away from the state legislatures back to the people to prove that we have the fundamental right to vote. And in North Carolina, the first and worst voter suppression law was, which we deemed the monster voter suppression law, came into being just hours after Shelby County was lifted. That law, which you have heard about throughout this convening, attacked every method of voting that was disproportionately used by black voters to change their political power in North Carolina with a multiracial fusion movement in 2008. So what we know is that this was a backlash to power. It was not, it was a specific effort to deny every avenue of voting, same-day registration, out-of-precinct voting, early voting days, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, and enacting a new photo voter ID in North Carolina. That's what Rosanelle Eaton stood up and said, no, we will not go back. And as the lead plaintiff in that case, which I was privileged to be a part of the team that came together to serve this movement, Marc, what we were able to do was to slice and dice and prove in the courts that they had, the General Assembly had requested and received information to slice and dice what were black voters using in North Carolina to enact their power. And then what choices did they make? At each turn, it was the choice to diminish and destroy that avenue. So what has happened since that? It took us 4.5 years to be able to get that law fully overturned. In North Carolina alone, we have stood up against more than 5 racial gerrymanders and partisan gerrymanders. And what has happened? We have won. And I want to say that because in the context of a time where we have so much diminished hope, we are winning. We are winning.
That's right.
We are winning. And we are winning because we are not backing down when people say to us that you will never be able to win in this court. You will never be able to win on this terrain. So most recently, and I just want to say this, Dr. Barber, if this is all right, on where we see this connectivity between the panel that you just saw this morning with my partners from Forward Justice around criminal justice and multiracial democracy. So in the South, felony disenfranchisement laws across the nation currently disenfranchise 1.3 million people who are in community on supervision. So I want you to hear me for a moment. And where is Sangria? Hear me for a moment, because this is important. Felony disenfranchisement laws are denying 1.3 million children of God who are in our communities right now across this nation their voice in this democracy. And they are doing it while asking those, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, to pay taxes, to take their children to PTA meetings. 1.1 million of those people, our people, live in the South. That is 86% of those voices that are being excluded. And the reason I want to emphasize that is because there has never been a time where the criminal justice system, the criminal legal system in this country, and the immigration system in this country has not been intertwined with a fight to maintain a white control over the democracy, the system of democracy. So we have to fight both at the same time.
Caitlin, let me introduce one piece.
Yes.
I want you all to hear, as public theologians, she said it took us 4.5 years to defeat the worst case after Shelby. In other words, they'd used this case to decide how they were going to spread it across the rest of the South. If they won it, then they were going to perpetuate it across the South.
That's right.
In the movement, we had to keep Monday going 4 years. Clergy. And we had to push into the veins of Jewish prudence this idea that comes out of the scriptures. This is the victory, even our faith.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That before you actually have the actual victory, your faith to fight is victory. See, that's a theological position. Your faith to fight is a victory even before you have the victory. So what we had to do was, when folks said, you all can't win in this court, so just stand down.
Yes.
The movement said to the lawyers, you don't stand down. I don't care what court it is. We have to still go and believe that there's something greater at work. Mm-hmm. But you know you're not going to win if you don't fight. That's given. So another principle we operated in the movement was the story of the lepers. In ancient Israel, the 4 of them who said, are we going to just sit here and die? And then they said, no, if we're going to die anyway,
That's right.
we might as well march toward the city. We might as well go have our day in court. And what happened as they were marching to the city, their leprosy sounding walking turned into the sound of an army, and they won. But they had to make a commitment. We already died. And we watched a lot of places and a lot of groups give up, didn't we?
Still are.
Still are. Just say, I don't need to fight. But these two and others grabbed a hold of the movement and this public theological position that we don't stand down just because there's the possibility of losing.
That's right.
If anything, you stand up, because what most folk don't remember is that it was one dissenter in Plessy versus Ferguson. His name was Justice Harlan. He was called the Great Dissenter. He dissented in 1883 when they overturned the civil rights laws, and he dissented in Plessy. His dissent helped lay the groundwork for Charles Hamilton Houston.
That's right.
His dissent.
That's right.
Moral dissent is necessary even when you don't have a majority vote.
That's right.
Because the dissent actually will create a place for which future people can stand to have victory.
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay, you have any more?
I will close
We're gonna
because
jump
I want
Marc
to
and
make
then
sure.
we'll get LaTosha in this.
Yeah, I will just say this. We have been spending so much time talking about what the different movements are that are alive right now in this country and what the terms are, what's at stake in this election. And I want to just proffer that we are so close. My hands are shaking a little because we are so close to a transformative agenda for change, for a third reconstruction of this country. We are in that period. And the terms, when we are seeking to remove the barriers to the right to vote right now, that is just one piece of the work that must happen, right? But we are going to keep playing our role. And what I have heard is that there is an army that is rising up of prophetic leaders who are going to be playing your role. And I have been taught that 5 fingers makes a fist. So when we move into this election cycle, to me, it's not about, it is about something that needs a prophetic. It needs a prophetic understanding to see where we are. It's not the people, it's the time that we are in. And I believe we are closer than they want us to believe.
That's right.
So I will close there.
Thank you. Let's thank you.
That's excellent, sister. That's excellent.
Proud daddy out there. So I'm going to give Marc, if you could take 7 strong minutes,
19.
and then Tasha take that, and then we're going to take the last, we've got 25 minutes, we're going to take the last 5 and go one by one. What would you demand that these presidential candidates ask as it relates to this issue? So Marc, Elias, my dear friend.
So let me answer both of the 2 questions. The first is, why am I in this fight? In part, I'm in this fight because of Reverend Barber, because the Moral Monday movement transformed my view of what the fight was and what it was capable of.
Yes.
As I reflect back now, the decision in Shelby County that Caitlin was talking about was a grave first step, but only a first step to destroying our democracy. We are on the precipice of losing our democracy. Each and every one of you will have to explain to your children and your grandchildren what you did at this moment in history when democracy was at stake. When I was getting bar mitzvahed, since the topic came up earlier, I had the opportunity to hear from a former U.S. soldier, a Jewish American, who had been a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany. Now, understand, at this point, the Holocaust was closer in time. World War II was closer in time. These people seemed very old to me, but they were probably, frankly, my age. They were probably in their 50s at that point. And a gentleman came, and he told us that he had been born and raised in Brooklyn, and he had been drafted or enlisted in the army, and he had been captured by the Nazis and sent to a stalag, like you see in the movies. So imagine you are an 18-year-old GI from New York City, and you find yourself in a prisoner of war camp where you are sorted by Jews and non-Jews. And he said that after some time, they were put in a work camp, and they were picking produce and processing goods for the German army, or so they assumed it was for the German army. And so he got this idea that he and a couple of other prisoners of war, Jewish prisoners of war, decided they'd execute, which is they would get little pieces of barbed wire from the fences. Now, this is the old-fashioned barbed wire, right? This is the pointy stuff, right? And they would press holes in the potatoes that they were picking and processing, with the idea that the potatoes would rot and it would starve the German war effort. Now, I want you to imagine for a second, you are 18 years old, you are Jewish, you are held by Nazis in a stalag prison of war camp, and you come up with the idea that you're going to win the war effort by taking barbed wire and pressing it against your bare skin until your fingers are all bloody. And in the process of it, you will poke holes in enough potatoes that they will rot and the Germans will starve and you'll win the war. I fight in court every day because I am poking holes in the potatoes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I don't know whether it will starve the war, the white supremacists and the white Christian nationalists and the vote suppressors and the election subverters. Like, I don't know whether it will do that, but what else am I going to do? I don't want to tell my children and my grandchildren that when democracy was at stake, when fascism was on the rise, when black voters were being systematically targeted, when young voters were being disenfranchised, when Latinos were having their voting rights taken away by racist legislatures, that I just thought, well, what could I do? What I could do is I could do the one thing I can do, which is I can speak out in the town square at every opportunity and say, this is not okay. And I could use my law degree at every turn to go to court to fight for free and fair elections. And it may not be enough, but that's what I can do. So that's why I'm in this fight. Now, I want you to pivot, though, with me and understand one thing about elections. There are no neutral voting laws.
No.
There is no such thing as a neutral voting law. I could draft voting laws. If I was given the pen and could do anything, I could redistrict the entire country. There wouldn't be a Republican in office.
That's right.
I could. I could draft voting laws that Democrats would never win, Republicans would never win, white voters would have more than one vote, black voters would have 7 votes, right? If I could concoct the voting laws however I wanted, you could rig the outcome. Yep. If you believe, as the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals found, that North Carolina in 2013 was willing to target black voters with near surgical precision, what the hell do you think is going on today? Let me tell you a couple of statistics that bleed into the cases that we're litigating. In the state of Florida in 2018, if you were, and I use 2018 because we have very good data from 2018, I could use 2020 and I will use some 2020 data, but in 2018, Close Senate race, close governor's race. Bill Nelson lost by 0.1%. Ron DeSantis won by just over 0.1%. If you voted in that election by mail and you were 18 to 21, your rate of ballot rejection was 5.6%. I'm sorry, 5.4%. 5.4%. You're going to want to write these numbers down. If you were over the age of 65, your rate of rejection was 0.6%, which means if you were a young voter, you had a 1 in 20 chance of having your ballot thrown in the trash. If you were over the age of 65, it was 1 in 200. If you were black or Latino, it was twice the rate of if you were white. In Georgia, the Stacey Abrams race, after that analysis, I had someone look at that race. Similar things on race. If you were a woman, you had a higher rate of rejection than if you were a man. So literally, looking at the 2018 election, at least in those two states, you had a system that if you were trying to design it to benefit old white men, you would hit the jackpot. Wow. Colorado, good state run by progressives. 150,000 ballots have been thrown out for signature matching in the last 10 years. Does anyone here believe there are 150,000 fraudulent votes in Colorado? Anyone here believe there are 150 fraudulent votes in Colorado? Sorry. Why the hell are they throwing those ballots out? Well, what I know about those ballots is that 2/3 of them are from voters under the age of 35. And they are disproportionately Latino, they are disproportionately black. Washington State, another good blue state. I'm using blue states for a reason.
Right. Yes.
Because the problem of voter suppression isn't confined just to the South, it's in the North. It's not just in red states, it's in blue states. It's worse in some states than others. But Washington State, black voters had a 5 times the rate of rejection than whites. Latinos had a 4 times rate of rejection than whites. So if I could design a voting system, like I said, that wanted to benefit old white men, you got a pretty good system. Some of this is by design. Some of it is by recent design. It's because legislatures want to pass laws and they want to target some populations. Some of it's not by design. Some of it was by design 100 years ago, but these laws are still in effect. Michigan had a law that prevented free rides to the polls, paying people for free rides to the polls. Who did that impact? It impacted 2 groups, black churches and young people who don't have cars. We sued, we got that changed. We're suing New York right now. Why? New York has a ban on food and water, providing free food and water for people in line. Now, why do I start with New York? Because sure, we're suing Georgia, and sure, we're suing Florida. We won in Florida, we're gonna win in Georgia. But New York's got that ban. Why the hell does New York prevent free food and water for people waiting in line? I'm representing the NAACP of Brooklyn in that case. Mm-hmm. Voter suppression is everywhere once you start looking for it. The system of voting in this country is atrocious, and it is particularly bad for minority voters and young voters. Yeah. We are right now litigating 57 cases in 23 states. And they fall into a few buckets. Number one, we have made voting by mail impenetrably difficult in this country. In Wisconsin, you need not only to vote, when you vote by mail, you don't have to fill out your own absentee ballot envelope, you have to get a witness. You have to find someone who witnesses you filling out your absentee ballot envelope. 7% of all the witness certificates in the state of Wisconsin had some type of problem. We're suing to make that better.
So, Marc, you're all over the country. I'm glad you said New York and all the other places, because we have these false assumptions. And what you need to understand, I think, Marc, is that New York is a place where Democrats control.
They could change that law any day.
That's right.
Right, and one of the things we were often challenged with is that we won more freedom in our voting laws in North Carolina than New York had. New Yorkers often try to tell us how liberal they are, but I don't think they have same-day registration or early voting.
Look, New York has bad voting laws, and it's atrocious, and I call out Democrats in every room that I can.
And you see why we talk about that as a moral position? You can't get stuck over here as a public theologian just for Democrats or just Republicans. You have to question the injustice wherever it exists. Right. I got a note.
Can I give one more statistic?
One more, yeah.
I want
somebody
you to
help me read this note because I don't understand it. I mean, somebody from back there.
I want to give you one more statistic and then I'll end. In the state of Georgia, if you voted in the Democratic primary in 2020, and you were in the 6 metro counties of Atlanta, and you were in a precinct that was 90% or more registered black voters. You waited in line an average of 51 minutes. Does anyone want to guess what it was if you were in the 6 same counties? So there's no question of county resources or county government. Same 6 counties, and it was in precinct 90% or more white?
5 minutes.
6. Why did they ban food and water in line? Because the only people waiting in line in Georgia are black.
That's right.
White people don't wait in line in Georgia. So we need to question for every method of voting what we can do. We sued Georgia, we got that changed. We need to question in every aspect of voting how we can make it fairer. It's never going to be perfect, but how we can make it fairer. And there's improvement to be done everywhere, including in Connecticut.
And oftentimes the racism of it is not just straight up. Nobody's going to call you the N-word, say we're doing. You have to look at the statistics, like who's eating in line. You got to do the data, and then why are they attacking, and then because something can be a racial violation, and you never use a racial word.
Right.
The Bible calls it wolves in sheep clothing.
Yep.
LaTosha, take us to about 1250 or so, best way you can, 1251, and then we're going to do that quick question. Now, I need to ask a favor. When this panel ends, we need folk to get their lunch, do bathroom lunch, and come back in here. We have a little travel issue. We want to get you out on time. This has been good, though, hasn't it? The expansiveness. I'm trying not to, be so hard on the time and miss some things. But remember, this is an inaugural conference.
That's right.
And we're trying to tease on some things because this panel here could be one whole day, right? This whole piece. So welcome my sister, LaTosha Brown.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Amen. I wanted to start in that spirit because I think sometimes we really believe that what we're really fighting about is about the control of politics. And I'm the first to say, even though my organization is called Black Voters Matter and I have done voter work my entire adult life, our politics will not save us, our humanity will. And so if we're thinking in that spirit, and I wanted to start in that freedom song because I'm sitting here really full about this is the conversation and we're the people to do this work. And then I was thinking about, I can give you the stats and I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing, but I've been putting God has been putting on my spirit about Harriet Tubman. So here's this woman who could not read or write, because they say education is going to be for your liberation, right? But could not read or write, but God gave her these visions. And then part of what I was thinking about is, here is a woman that had a $50,000 bounty on her head. We don't see people with $50,000 rewards now. So imagine a $50,000 bounty on your head back then. That's like $500,000, right? So here's a woman that could not read or write, who had blackouts, right? Where some folks it was narcolepsy, but ultimately who had been abused, had never seen this space called freedom, right? But it was something in her humanity said, this ain't what God wants for me. Right, there's something else greater for me. And then in that process, it's interesting the way that she got to the north is she followed what was a North Star. Yes. And so it had me really looking, Bishop, around what was a North Star, particularly because I look at some of these lessons, I take them as political lessons, just like I actually look at the Bible for political strategy, believe it or not. And so part of looking at this North Star, I started researching stars. And what was really interesting is that I thought the North Star was the brightest star in the sky, and it's not. It's called the Polaris star. It's not necessarily the brightest star in the sky. Matter of fact, the thing that distinguishes it is that it's the most dependable. It is always there. Yes. So it is the star that sometimes is not the brightest, but you can always find it at the top of the Big Dipper, and it is the most consistent star. Some folks even think that in the scripture, when they're talking about the wise men and the star, that it was the same star. So, but let me just say this. So what's really interesting about that star is that not only is it's in the position where it's most dependable, you can always, night after night, you can find it. And so a couple of weeks ago, I was doing an interview, and this woman asked me, in this interview, she asked me, you know, we're in this dark night, this political dark night of the soul, right? And, you know, what are we going to do? Democracy is ending, X, Y, Z, and I have a different spirit, but I have a different feeling about what this moment is. Because my ancestors, I'm from Selma, Alabama, and my ancestors were actually brought to this country 30 minutes away from where I grew up, in the house that I grew up as enslaved Africans. And so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, you know, at the end of the day, that there were folk in my family that actually waited for the night to come. Because it is in the nighttime that you actually see the stars. That ultimately, what we have to really recognize in this moment, that God has given us an opportunity for the stars to show us and show out. But I also looked at another star. There's a star called the phantom star. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the phantom star, but what a phantom star is that some of the stars that we're seeing in the sky, they've actually burned out millions of years ago. All we're seeing is a residue of their glory days, that they don't even exist anymore, that's all we're seeing. And so in this moment, politically, we're looking at this dark night, but the truth of the matter is God got new stars being born every day, right? And that at the end of the day, the night is the moment that stars are supposed to shine, right? And there's stars that we're looking at that they don't even exist, y'all. It's over with. It's done, right? Their time is over. And all we're seeing is the residue of what was supposed to be their glory days. And we're getting caught up looking at them when God got stars all around us. And so I say that in this moment because when we're talking about voter suppression, the truth of the matter is America ain't never been where she was supposed to be. Ever, not according to it. That all men are created equal and endowed by their creator. Do we actually treat people that way? We have to demand that. So those of us that are people of faith, we're supposed to be the moral consciousness of this nation. We're supposed to do this work because ultimately voting is really around, I learned this around the same word for vote is the same word for voice. And so in Hebrew. And so in the same space that when you are cutting people off from voting, that we have to recognize that what we're doing is we're saying that their voice doesn't matter. And that ultimately if God gives us the one gift that separates us from other living beings is our power of choice. And so when we allow people to actually attack a human being's power of choice, you are literally denying them or trying to deny them what God gave them that actually is part of the character of being a human being. And so I'm raising this, I'll say this because I know that I got 1 minute, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm raising this because y'all, we gotta elevate our thinking around this. Yes. Like when we get caught up in the details of this conversation about what the founders intended, the truth of the matter is the founders didn't even intend for this panel to be up here, right? That their vision was so limited that they could not see the humanity, the full humanity in all of our people, right? So we've got to really see ourselves as not just citizens of this nation. We've got to see ourselves as founders of a new nation. Founders of a new nation in America, that if we're saying we're the wealthiest in the world, why we ain't the healthiest in the world? Why are we not demanding that our taxes, that we're literally, the money that you and I are making, we're literally spending to kill people instead of lift folk up? That we're literally in a space that even in Georgia, one of my grandbabies, his mother was able, she got her food stamps cut off, but she got an iPad that was paid for by the state of Georgia. She didn't need an iPad, she needed food, right? But somebody got paid for an iPad opposed to her having her food stamps and what she needed. I'm raising this, that I don't expect that leaders are just gonna stand up and shift and change. That's not how it works, y'all. But those of us that are people of faith, if we don't really understand that this is our moment, this dark night is the moment that God is placing for us to shine in this moment to bring clarity, the moral clarity around justice, more clarity around leadership, the more clarity around the equitable distribution of funds. But we got to know who we are. And so it's not a matter of those that are in place, because I'm telling you, those that are in place that seek to take us back, and if we're constantly in this perspective of teaching folks fear, my grandmother used to say, baby, speak life into them. And so part of what we've got to do It speaks life in our people. When we're organizing and vote, Black Voters Matter, to your point, and we're talking about, well, you can't win. I can tell you some races that seem impossible,
Yes.
right? Just because the people believe,
Yes.
right? And so if belief is so powerful, it even says in the scripture that Jesus couldn't even work a miracle in his place of birth because people didn't believe. Then part of our responsibility
Yes.
is get people to believe again, right? And that's, I'll stop there. Oh, no, thank y'all.
That's it. That's it. And part of what enables people to believe is what you do with your nighttime.
That's right.
Because you can either let your adversary interpret it,
That's it.
or you can interpret it, right? And so on the one hand, you need to know the negative. The night is real. But it's a realness that is merely the absence of light. It's not a realness that is real in itself. You know, my son, who's a physicist, came home one day and said, "Dad, at nighttime you need to stop saying that darkness is real. It's real, but it's not real." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You can't make a light bulb that shines darkness." He said, the only thing darkness is the absence of light. The moment light comes, darkness has to move. He said, so if you're going to push people to vote, you can't just tell them how bad it is. You can say how bad it is, but then you got to say, but. And as you said, built for the night. And teach them that everybody we honor up here on this wall, they became a star in the night. The question is not what you do on your best day. The question is what you do on your worst day. The question is not what you do when your friends compliment you. The question is what you do when your enemies talk about you. That's the measure, right? And then you find ways to say, and this is not just quote inspiration. I'm inspired by the facts. The facts are we don't know. The South, we heard the other day, was intentionally divided. If it was intentionally divided, it could be intentionally unified. It's not like some gods came down and divided it. It was human beings with much less integrity, morality, and intellect than you all, right? And then we look at the data. Write this number down, 18%. 12%, 4%, 21%, 22%. That's the margin, that's the number of poor and low wage voters you would need to mobilize. Many of them they already registered and have voted before in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas to win. I didn't say a number over 22%. But nobody's going to tell us that. They're going to tell us the opposite. And this means that's the percentage that you can turn an elections around, change what's this out, and then change who's writing the laws. But they're not going to tell us that. What you're going to hear constantly on the news, these are red states. These are blue states. It's already decided. And public theologians can't just go along with what is the headline in a news story. We have to go underneath. As LaTosha said, there's a great psalm in Psalm 42 says, don't forget there's a song in the night. There's a bird, a nightingale, that doesn't sing till it's night. And we must be those that have a song in the night. And we don't even have to walk just by faith. We can walk by facts too. It's all ours. That's right. Right. But we've got to, that's why we've got to understand and produce another narrative and believe that this is a third reconstruction. I go back and close here with what Howard Thurman once said, is oftentimes you have to come to know your strength by the attack of your adversary. The level at which your adversary attacks you is the proof of really how strong you are. They're trying to stop you from something that if you use it, they will not be able to hold you down or hold you up or hold you back. So we thank this panel. I'm going to ask, because of the time, that they run real quick. This is going to be a quickie question. Then we're going to break. We've already asked for blessings over the whole day and over the food, so we don't have to do another blessing. But just in quick order, Rick, what question?
Instead of just one question, I would have an image of God candidate forum where every question was given the Bible's conviction that every man and woman, every child is created as God's own image in the world. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for immigration? What does that mean for child care?
All right, I got it.
What does that mean for, whatever?
That's right.
I want an image of God forum.
That's right. All right. Marc, excuse me.
Yeah, look, I think that we came very close to passing really important democracy legislation in the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and I think we can't give up pressure on that. The fact is we need every candidate in every race to agree at the federal level that they will support those two pieces of legislation, at the state level that they will enact state equivalents to those pieces of legislation.
I'll say quickly that I think we need love. And when I say a love strategy, I think, one, we need leadership. We need to take seriously in terms of a leader that will lead this country into the next place. We need opportunities. We need to demand that there's expanded opportunities for communities, particularly marginalized communities. We need vision. We need a vision, a radical reimagination of every single system in this country. We can't just accept what is. That we need a reform around the Supreme Court. Those are things that we need to be thinking about right now. And then E, I think that we need literally to force economic parity when we've got a political party that won't even say the word poor.
Yes.
We've got a political party that the base in itself, it actually separates as if everybody is middle class when we know that there are people who are struggling every single day. And so there's a way that we've got to really push an economic strategy that actually rivals the defense budget.
That's right. What would you put before presidential candidate, Kate?
I'm going to just combine Marc and LaTosha, which is what I'm going to try to do for the rest of my life. Is what in your policies, what in your voting rights policies show that you love the sick, show that you love the children, show that you love the prisoner, show that you love the hungry, show that you love women, show that you love black people. What in your policies, and this is from Mama Nia Wilson of Spirit House, who said we need a love index for our policies right now to just define this moment differently.
A love index.
Yep.
As we prepared, I was looking at the TV this morning, the news. You know now the news is trying to run this thing. They always do it, to blame whatever happens on black folk. So they're now talking about black young people are not going to vote and da-da-da-da-da-da. But inside, I didn't want to listen to it, but something said listen. And then I heard one of the young people say this. They were talking about whether or not they were going to vote. And of course, they talked about, what's going on with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, whatnot. But one of the young men said this: I would vote for a candidate who would be serious about living wages. He said, living wages haven't been raised since I was 14 years old.
That's right.
This is a young college student. Mm-hmm. And his issue was, he said this morning, I'm looking for candidates who are going to take seriously economic injustice. Yeah. Our young people are not wanting to vote. What they are wanting to is to vote for that which matters
vision.
and the vision and will transform this country.
Yes, yes.
They are hungering for a moral vision.
They want a vision.
Let's make sure that we give them one. Give this panel a hand.
Did you hear?